thinking about science now in that sense, as distinct from the life world, I want to talk about a number of possible definitions of the discipline of education and what we're doing. And in doing that, I want to highlight some of the peculiar complexities of this field. So what we often do in education schools and teaching education is very, very instrumental stuff, which I call mastering the institutions, right? Which is, it used to be called teacher training, which is what you do in pedagogy, how you do assessment, how you do educational administration. So this is the stuff of, I'm going to become a teacher. How do I do it? What are the pragmatics of these things? And in a way, this is the narrowest form of understanding education as a discipline, as a set of professional practices which can be taught conceptually, like what is curriculum and what is pedagogy and how does it work, and practiced in trial settings. I can go out into a school and I can try out how well I go at practicing these things. So it's a very instrumental understanding of what education is as a discipline. Of course, we need to know all this stuff and we need to be able to operate in these kinds of ways, but this is a pretty narrow understanding of education as a discipline. Going one layer out, one of the things that bedevils education as a discipline is just the range of methodologies is actually a bit of everything. So when you're doing an education degree, you'll do a bit of sociology, you might do a bit of history of education, you might do a bit of psychology. In fact, that's pretty darn important in terms of child development and psychology of groups and psychology of learning, cognitive psychology and so on. You might do some cognitive science, which one of these new sort of hybrid disciplines or sub-disciplines. You might do some linguistics because you're going to be teaching language, for example. You might do some educational philosophy. And in fact, if you go to any education school, you'll discover a lot of these sub-disciplines at work, each with their own characteristic methodologies. They're quite different from each other in all sorts of ways. So that's another understanding of education. But in fact, this interdisciplinary nature of the field means that it often doesn't feel like it has a great deal of methodological coherence. It doesn't feel like it has the same rigorous status where when you're doing law, there's a set of methodologies which are pretty consistent and pretty distinctive, and law is pretty different from physics. When you do physics, there are a set of methodologies which are distinctive and pretty different from law. But here you've got education where you've got all these different methodologies at work which are all related to other disciplines. Now, let me go one layer beyond this to education, and that is that one of the interesting things about education is that it's foundational of every other discipline, right? So in other words, you can't become a lawyer without learning law. And in fact, practicing law, you're constantly learning as you go. That you can't become a physicist without learning physics. And practicing physics, you learn as you go. So one of the interesting things about the interdisciplinary nature of education is there's not another discipline which doesn't have learning as integral part of the apprenticeship process. And the ongoing process of development of that discipline and development of you as a practitioner in that discipline. So this takes both the form of formal learning, so all of these other practices, law and physics and all the other things, they involve formal learning structures as part of induction into the discipline, but also ongoing informal learning as you become a practitioner of those things through life. So education is everywhere, but just the fact that it's everywhere also means that it's kind of diffused and not entirely valued and often not explicit and not well thought through, and it's why some legal teachers are good at the law but pretty bad teachers, and some physicists are pretty good physicists but not great teachers, because this is often regarded as not so important. The processes of learning and coming to know are regarded as instrumental and secondary, even though they're everywhere through all those disciplines, in a way, by the way, that is not the case for any other discipline. You don't find physics in every other discipline, and you don't find law in every other discipline, but you find education as an integral part of every other discipline. Which leads me to a sort of an outside, all-encompassing circle, which helps me, I think about how do we redefine the science of learning, the science of education. And I'm going to call it methodisciplinary education. So what we're interested in this discipline is how people come to know, how groups and organisations learn, and how human knowledge and learning progresses. These are fundamental questions. Here's a definition. Education is the science of coming to know. How do individuals come to know? How do groups come to know? How do we as a species come to know? And in that sense, this very broad metadisciplinary sense, education becomes the science of sciences. And one last sort of statement I'd like to make is, look, the science of sciences, well, the area which used to be the so-called king or queen of all the disciplines was philosophy. Now, philosophy has become, for a whole lot of complicated reasons, irrelevant. Philosophy departments are pretty small. Philosophy is not taught at school. At least it's not taught at school in Anglophone countries. So philosophy was meant to be the place where you thought about thinking, where the nature of knowledge was and the nature of human existence was considered, and it was meant to be the discipline which was the overarching discipline which covered all other disciplines. In fact, it's become slightly irrelevant, slightly boring, overly technical, and you can't get a job in philosophy because the philosophy departments are getting smaller, not bigger. People are not interested in it. It's not practical. It doesn't, help you become a worker in the tourism industry or an accountant or all these other practical things you need in the world. So why would you do philosophy? Well, in fact, I would like to say, why don't we say that education's the new philosophy? We need it everywhere. It's essential in learning every discipline. The process of coming to know is essential for every individual as they grow through childhood and then through their lives, and organisations as they collect knowledge about the world, as they learn about themselves, as they have maybe specific training units in the organisation, but as well as this notion of the learning organisation, which is able to adapt to its environment and become more and more responsive to that environment because it's systematically collecting knowledge and applying that knowledge about the environment. So what we might argue is that because education is everywhere, it perhaps should take this central role, which is as important as philosophy had been in the past, but it's since become less important, made itself irrelevant. Let's make ourselves relevant in this metadisciplinary kind of way.